Okay, welcome back. This is the fourth Sunday of Lent, Year B. And today we're going to look at three readings. The first one will be out of the second book of Chronicles, chapter 36, verses 14 to 16, and then on to 19 to 23. We'll also look at Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, verses 4 to 10, and then finally the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verses 14 to 21. A couple things on the background to second book of Chronicles. Originally it was one scroll, which included First Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah. This book is very, very much concerned with the monarchy of Solomon, and it very much idealizes Solomon. These are the glory days of the nation of Israel, and this writer loves the temple and loves to speak about the temple and its magnificence and the importance of temple worship, the greatness of Jerusalem, and his love for the southern kingdom of Israel. What happens today is also recorded in the second book of Kings, chapter 25, and in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 52. And this is a very, very, very sad day in the history of Israel, perhaps the saddest day in the history of Israel, because at this time the kingdom of Israel has been occupied by the Babylonians. They have exiled some of those important people back to Babylon, and the last king of Israel, whose name is Zedekiah, is a young man at 21, rebels against Babylonian rule. And as a punishment, they capture him. They capture his son. They slay his son right in front of his eyes. And then after that, take out his own eyes. So the last thing that Zedekiah ever sees is the death of his son. And for a Jewish man, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. So it's a very, very sad story. And I thought I'd read just a verse or two. And it says something like this. Zedekiah became stiff-necked and hardened his heart, rather than return to the Lord, the God of Israel. Likewise, all the princes of Judah, the priests, and the people added infidelity to infidelity, practicing all the abominations of the nations, and polluting the Lord's temple, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. So notice again that reference of the temple and how it had been polluted. Basically, what the writer is saying is that when you lose the grace of God, when you're unfaithful to the covenant, when you do not listen to the prophets that he has sent, such as Jeremiah, then bad things happen. And as a result, the Babylonians destroy the city, they burn down the temple, and they take the people into exile. So it's a very, very tragic day for the people of Israel. The second reading is out of Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and is a much more upbeat letter. So as a result, the first reading talks about grace, and when you lose grace, what kind of bad things happen. The second reading is almost the opposite. Paul's letter was probably written between 80 and 100 AD. Some scholars question whether it's authentically Pauline. The theme, the tone, the vocabulary are much different than Paul's authentic letters, such as Romans and 1-2 Corinthians. But in any case, it's a universal letter, and it takes place in a town very, very much loved by Paul. He formed a community there and had a lot of success there. The Apostle John traditionally had also lived there and formed a very, very dynamic community. Matter of fact, the Gospel of John probably was written in Ephesus itself. And in any case, what happens here is Paul is emphasizing that we are saved by grace. So if you're faithful to God, faithful to the covenant, love your neighbor, obey the commandments of God, then really, really good things will happen. And as a little quote here, Paul says, "By grace you have been saved through faith." By grace you have been saved through faith. So salvation basically is reconnecting with God, getting that relationship back where it should be. The opposite of salvation is alienation. And what Jesus does is come and teaches us how to re-engage in that relationship with God through faith in him. The final reading we'll look at is out of the Gospel of John, chapter 3. And this is the famous story of Nicodemus. And what you might find interesting about the Gospel of John is Jesus is always in control. We call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the synoptic Gospels because they seem to have pretty much the same stories in the same order. But John is very, very different, and again, always portrays Jesus as in control. And in John chapter 3, this Pharisee, who traditionally are not spoken very well of in the Gospels, visits Jesus at night. He's a secret follower of Jesus. He does not want to be exposed to the people of power. So he visits Jesus at night and begins to question his teachings. And you may recall that story in the Old Testament where Moses lifts up the serpent in the desert. In that story, many of the Israelites have been bitten by snakes, and they don't know what to do, so Moses forms a bronze snake, puts it on a pole, and lifts it up. And when the people observe and look at this bronze snake, they are saved from the snake bites. And so John uses that story to remind us that just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert and the people were saved, so Jesus will be lifted up on the cross, and likewise the people will be saved. I want to share with you perhaps the most famous, or at least one of the most famous lines in the entire New Testament. You'll see this on bumper stickers. You'll see people holding this up on posters at sporting events, and it's the famous line out of John 3:16. And that's included in today's reading. And it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life." So again, we return to that theme of grace. In the first reading, there was a lack of grace which caused death and destruction. In the second reading, Paul reminds us that grace brings life. And in this reading, we're once again reminded that the grace of God is really most manifest through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And John says, "Whoever believes in him will not be condemned, but whoever does not believe in him has already been condemned." And he's not saying that necessarily non-Christians are going to hell or anything like that, but it just means that for John, the most efficient way, the best way to connect with Jesus is through faith in him. And God's commitment to the world is best manifested through Jesus' death on the cross. So that's a little bit out of Fourth Sunday in Lent, Year B. Again, we read 2 Chronicles, Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and John's Gospel, chapter 3. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you again next week.